Hello creative friends, this is Joy. So for today's video I am showing you how I go through and make some stamp and Polaroid framed fodder for the art journals that I created. And so here I just went through and I had some die cuts that were stamp frames, and I decided to cut out three large ones and three small ones. And then I went through my stash of magazine images that I have and finding pictures that I could put on each one of these. And so here I am just cutting down trimming up the pictures to fit inside the stamped frames here that I have, and making sure that I have a little bit of a white border around the image. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just trimming up the pictures to fit inside of this frame that I have. I decided that I got this die cut, these dies, not too long ago, and I've been wanting to use them, and I really like the idea of it being like a kind of a stamp design or whatever. But then I realized afterwards that I have scissors that's all different color scissors, and each one has a different cut. And I think everybody that's doing crafting pretty much probably has a set of these scissors. They've been around I've had them forever. And matter of fact, I've got them back in my scrapbooking days years and years ago. And there's actually a pair of scissors that cuts an edge that looks like a stamp. So actually I really didn't need the die. I could have just used what I had. But anyway, I got the die and I cut these frames. And so here I have this one image that's oval that I cut down. It's an oval, but I want it to fit inside the frame and kind of like make sense. So I got a piece of paper here, a scrap paper leftover from making the journals, that I think goes well with this image, that'll fit inside that frame that I can glue down, and then put the image on top of that, and then it kind of like makes it make more sense, and then it fits in the frame better rather than just sticking the oval picture in there. So I put down a piece of that green paper, and then I glued my image on top of that, and I think that looks better, and it makes sense. And so I did the same with the little ones, the three little ones. I trimmed up the image. And there goes my clock. And I picked a piece of leftover scrap paper that I thought would go with the image. And I measured what size I needed that to be, and then I cut that down to the size I needed it to be to go inside the frame. And then I put my image on top of that. And I'm just using a Yoo-hoo glue stick to glue all this down. So yeah, that's how I created these all stamped images, and I think they turned out really cute. So then I decided to add a little bit more to these, and so I grabbed a couple of paint markers that I have in my stash to frame out and go around some of the images. So that's what I'm doing here. I did a little bit of a gold around that, and this one here. that I thought went, well with the image, and on this image here as well. And then on a couple of the others, I decided to use a different color other than the gold. So I grabbed a green out of my stash and a blue, and decided to go around this image here with the green. I felt like that kind of matched it better and gave a nice little frame around it. And then this one here, I decided to trace around it with the blue. And that's the stamped images that I got. And so here's the ones that I made for the Polaroids. So I had, again, I went through my stash and I found different images that I wanted to use for these Polaroid images. And so I'm just cutting it down to fit on these little leftover square pieces that I had. And I'm just, checking to see that if, fits on these square pieces with just a little bit of a white border around it. And again, I'm using my Yoo-Hoo glue stick to glue that down to that square piece. And I decided to mount the images on a square piece and then put it on the Polaroid instead of just sticking the image right straight to the Polaroid because I felt like it helped it to stand out better. So here I'm cutting this image down to the size I need it and then gluing that down. And I went through again my stash of magazine images, and I picked several that were of people and then several that were of animals. So I have kind of a variety here of some animals and some people. I tried to cut this particular image with my cutter, but it was not cutting well because of the magazine paper that it's on is very, very thin. So some of these I had to actually use my scissors to cut because the paper was just so thin that the cutter was just wanting to tear the paper instead of cut it. So here I'm just checking to see that I have that white border all the way around. And then I'm using the edge of the little square to, trim off, to get a straight cut on my image. And then I glue that down. So I go through and continue to do this for the other images that I selected. And here I didn't quite get it on there straight, but I felt like it needed a little more glue to it. So then once I got my images put onto these little squares, which I believe they were like 3 by 3 or 3.5 by 3.5, then I went ahead and glued them down to the other piece of cardstock that I had cut to turn this into like a Polaroid image, which you can see here, which I think turned out really well. I could have inked around the edges of these square pieces before I put them down, but I didn't feel like that they needed it, because just having that little bit of having the images mounted on those pieces of square kind of helped them stand out, on their own without having to ink around them. So yeah, I did 6 of these, and I think they turned out so super cute. And these are, these with the stamped images are going to be really fun to use in the journals that I created. So just continuing to work on creating fodder for the journals that I created, and using up some of the scraps that I ended up with from creating the journals, which I ended up with quite a few scraps from creating the journals. So, and this is definitely helping to cut down on the amount of scraps that I have to put in my scrap box, and to actually make some cute fodder that I can use when I go to decorating the journals that I've created. So gluing down the last picture here. And this is how I clean up the glue off of the glue stand so it doesn't end up being a problem. And so yeah, these are the little Polaroids, and I did decide to ink around the edges of the Polaroids themselves once I got them all glued down. So that's what I'm doing here with just a brown ink pad. Because I figure once I put them on a journal page or put them in a pocket or whatever, they probably look better with inked edges. So there you go. Thank you for stopping by and watching, and we'll talk to you later. Bye bye.